Come closer. Let me tell you about the silence. Before the shells, before the screams, before the world tore itself open, there was a silence. June 6, 1944. And inside a German observation bunker carved into the cliffs over the Normandy coast, a place they called Widerstandsnest 6-2, that silence was thick, cold, and smug. It was the silence of certainty. Our human anchor in this story, our man staring into that deceptive quiet, is Major Werner Pluskat. He's an artillery officer in the 352nd Infantry Division, not a hardened fanatic from the Eastern Front, but a professional, a man who understands the brutal mathematics of trajectory and range. His world is one of angles, wind speed, and the cold, hard logic of a well-placed gun. And for days, the logic was simple: no one could cross the English Channel in this storm. The sea was a gray, angry animal, and even the British, as mad as they were, wouldn't dare try it. The official forecast from the Luftwaffe's own meteorologist was clear: the weather was a fortress more powerful than any concrete wall. So imagine Pluskat in that pre-dawn chill. The air in the bunker is stale, tasting of cold concrete, day-old coffee, and the faint metallic tang of the massive artillery pieces resting just outside. Through the narrow observation slit, the world is a smear of gray on gray. The sea and the sky have not yet decided to separate. He's been awake for hours, of course. There had been disturbances. Scattered reports crackling over the radio all night. Paratroopers dropping like ghosts all over the Cotentin Peninsula. But high command in Paris, and even the local army headquarters, were unconcerned. Diversions, the official word, came down. Enemy commandos trying to sow chaos. Small-scale stuff. The real attack is coming at Calais. Everyone knows that. Don't waste ammunition on phantoms. Pluskat, a good soldier, accepts the logic. The plan is everything. The plan says Calais. The shortest distance. The biggest prize. So this is just noise. Annoying, but insignificant. He lifts his field glasses, the heavy Zeiss optics feeling cold and solid in his hands. He's just doing his duty, scanning the horizon one last time before the sun burns through the gloom. He expects to see nothing but waves and mist. But then it happens. A trick of the light. A break in the low-hanging clouds. The mist on the water doesn't just thin, it peels back, like a curtain being drawn on the final act of a play he never knew he was watching. And he sees it. It's not a ship. It's not a patrol boat. It's not even a reconnaissance fleet. It is a city. A floating, impossible city of gray steel that covers the entire horizon. Masts and funnels stretch from left to right as far as the eye can see, a forest of metal that has grown from the sea in the dead of night. He drops the binoculars, rubs his eyes, convinced he's hallucinating, that the exhaustion is finally making him see things. He lifts them again. The city is still there. It's closer now. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and behind them, a black swarm of smaller craft, like insects clinging to giants. Thousands of them. So many that the sea itself seems to have vanished beneath their hulls. The logic of his world, the forecasts, the intelligence reports, the Führer's own certainty about Calais, all of it shatters in a single, silent, heart-stopping second. This isn't a diversion. This isn't a raid. He can feel the truth in his bones, a cold dread that has nothing to do with the morning air. This is it. This is the day of days. His hand trembles as he reaches for the field telephone, the crank screaming in the quiet bunker. He gets through to his commanding officer, a man miles inland, safe in the certainty of the official plan. Pluskat's voice is a strained, incredulous whisper that cracks into a shout. It's the invasion. It's here. There must be 10,000 ships out there. And in that moment, as his superior officer on the other end of the line tells him to calm down, that he must be mistaken, the real war begins. Not a war against the men on those ships, not yet, but a war against a single, devastating question that hangs in the cold, damp air of the bunker. How do you tell your commanders that the world they believe in, the one they have built their entire strategy around, has just been proven to be a catastrophic lie? Now, you have to understand the mind of the German high command in that moment. It wasn't just a bureaucracy, it was a priesthood, and its one true religion was the plan. And the plan, for nearly 2 years, had a single, unshakable article of faith: the invasion would come at the Pas de Calais. Every map, every intelligence report, every troop disposition was a testament to this gospel. To question it wasn't just insubordination, it was heresy. Think of it like this: the Allies had spent months performing the greatest magic trick in military history, an operation codenamed Fortitude. They had built a phantom army in Kent, across from Calais, under the command of the one general the Germans feared most, George S. Patton. They conjured inflatable rubber tanks that, from the air, cast perfectly real shadows for Luftwaffe reconnaissance planes. They built plywood landing craft to clog the harbors of southeast England. They filled the airwaves with millions of pieces of false radio traffic, creating the electronic ghost of a 1 million-man force, the fictional 1st U.S. Army Group, preparing to cross the narrowest part of the Channel. It was a masterpiece of deception, a lie so vast and so beautifully constructed that the German command had fallen in love with it. They saw what they expected to see, what they wanted to see. It confirmed all their logical assumptions. Calais was closer to England, closer to Germany, and it had the deep water ports necessary for a full-scale invasion. Normandy, by contrast, was a strategic backwater with exposed beaches and difficult terrain. It was, according to the plan, the last place on Earth the Allies would dare to attack. So when Major Pluskat's frantic, borderline hysterical call reached the headquarters of the 352nd Infantry Division, the response was a perfect reflection of this religious certainty. The officer on the other end, Major Block, the Chief of Staff to General Lieutenant Kreis, did what any good officer would do when faced with a report that contradicted the entire known universe. He tried to fit it into the box of the existing reality. 10,000 ships? The words would have sounded like madness. Pluskat, calm yourself. It's the morning mist. It plays tricks on the eyes. It must be a small convoy, a demonstration designed to make us panic. This was the official explanation, born in an instant. It wasn't a lie, not in the mind of Major Block. It was a logical diagnosis of a flawed report. A feint. A diversion. The terms were comforting. They were the system's antibodies, rushing to neutralize a piece of information that threatened the health of the plan. On the official war logs, the initial reports were noted with a kind of detached skepticism. Coastal Observer reports large concentration of enemy vessels. Suspected naval exercise or diversionary maneuver. The language itself was designed to reduce the terrifying scope of Pluskat's vision into a manageable, predictable enemy action. The system was pushing back, trying to force reality to conform to the map, not the other way around. But there is a force in war more powerful than any plan, more convincing than any map. It's the brutal, undeniable truth of high explosives. While the officers miles inland were calmly reassuring each other that Pluskat was overwrought, Pluskat was still staring through his binoculars. And he saw something that could not be misinterpreted. Along the entire length of that impossible steel horizon, a line of fire, brilliant orange in the gray dawn, rippled from the barrels of 1,000 naval guns. For a few agonizing seconds, there was silence. The time it took for thousands of tons of steel to arc across miles of open water. And then, the contradiction arrived. It wasn't a report. It wasn't a whispered doubt. It was the fist of God slamming into the coast of France. The ground beneath Pluskat's bunker didn't just shake, it leaped. The air didn't just roar, it split apart. The entire Atlantic Wall, Hitler's vaunted, impregnable fortress, began to systematically disintegrate under a bombardment of a scale no human had ever witnessed before. The official explanation, spoken so calmly over the phone just minutes earlier, looked not just wrong, but fatally naive. The quiet, logical war of maps and plans was over. The loud, chaotic, and bloody war of ground and steel had just begun. And the first casualty was the comforting lie they had all been telling themselves. Let's pull the camera back from the vibrating concrete of Pluskat's bunker. Let's look at the whole of France, laid out like a giant map in the silent, wood-paneled offices of the German High Command. Because what was happening on that beach wasn't just a tactical problem, it was an existential threat to the entire German theory of victory in the West. And that theory had a name: Erwin Rommel. Rommel, the desert fox, knew the Allies were coming. He wasn't a fool. But he was obsessed with one single, terrifying idea: if the Allies managed to establish a foothold, a lodgment on the continent, the war was over. He knew Germany couldn't win a protracted war of attrition against the industrial might of America and the manpower of the Soviet Union. The invasion had to be defeated on the beaches in the first 24 hours. It had to be, as he famously said, the longest day. To understand the stakes, you need a war college briefing. Imagine the German defense of France is a giant mousetrap. The Atlantic Wall, with men like Pluskat in their bunkers, is the bait and the tripwire. It's not designed to win the war on its own. It's designed to hold the enemy for a few crucial hours, to bleed them on the sand, and, most importantly, to signal where the mouse has struck. The real killing power, the steel jaw of the trap, was held back from the coast. This was the Panzerwaffe. The elite, armored divisions, the 21st Panzer, the 12th SS Hitlerjugend, the Panzer Layer were the iron heart of the German defense. They were a coiled spring of immense power, waiting to be unleashed on the exposed and vulnerable landing forces to drive them back into the sea in a maelstrom of fire and steel. This is why Pluskat's report, and the bombardment that followed, created a crisis of almost unimaginable proportions. The tripwire had been sprung. The trap was screaming to be activated. But here's the fatal flaw in the German machine. What if you have two tripwires? The Phantom Army at Calais was one. The Impossible Armada at Normandy was the other. Which one is real? If you uncoil that precious armored spring and launch it at Normandy, and it turns out to be a feint, you have left the door to Calais, the direct route to Germany, wide open. Your trump card is played. Your trap is spent. The enemy can then land with their real army, and you have nothing left to stop them. This strategic schizophrenia paralyzed the German command structure. And this is where the system's design guaranteed its own failure. The generals on the scene, men like Field Marshal Rommel and his superior, the elderly and cautious Field Marshal von Rundstedt, didn't even have the final authority to move these panzer divisions. The most powerful units were designated as OKW, or High Command Reserve. That meant only one man could give the order to release them from their leash. A man sleeping soundly over 500 miles away in his mountain retreat in Berchtesgaden. A man whose aides had strict orders not to wake him for any reason. Adolf Hitler. So the frantic calls begin. From the bunkers to the divisional headquarters. From the divisional headquarters to the army group. A wave of panic and desperate certainty is racing up the chain of command, a plea for the one thing that can save them. They need the panzers. They need them now. A new, desperate mission is born in the chaos of that morning, not a mission of soldiers with rifles, but of officers with telephones, fighting a battle of persuasion against their own high command, trying to convince the priests of the plan that their God is dead and the apocalypse is happening right now, in Normandy. The hunt for truth begins not on the beaches, but in the air. While Pluskat's world is being torn apart by naval gunfire, a few hundred miles away, another German officer is climbing into the cockpit of a Messerschmitt Bf 109. His name is Joseph Pips Priller, and he is a legend. An ace with over 100 kills, a man who has dueled with Spitfires in the skies over Britain and survived. He is the commander of Jageschwader 26, a fighter wing stationed near Lille, perfectly positioned to defend Calais. For weeks, Priller and his men have been sitting on a powder keg, waiting for the invasion they knew was coming. But a perverse logic has taken hold of the Luftwaffe High Command. Fearing that the precious fighter wings would be wiped out on the ground by Allied bombing raids right before the main event, the bulk of Germany's air power in France had been pulled back, scattered, and placed on a hair-trigger alert. The result was a kind of paralysis. They were so afraid of losing their fighters before the real invasion that they were reluctant to commit them to anything that might be a diversion. That morning, the telex machines in Priller's command post chattered with confusing, contradictory orders. Reports of paratroopers near the Orne River. Reports of landings. But the official word from above was laced with caution. Stand by. Await confirmation. Do not engage without direct orders. The system was throttling itself, strangled by its own fear of being deceived. Priller, a man of action, is going mad with frustration. His pilots are in their cockpits, engines cold, staring at an empty sky while the radio crackles with rumors of the world ending 100 miles to the west. Then, a singular order comes through, but it's not the one he expects. It's not a command to launch his entire wing. It's a reconnaissance mission, a single flight. They need eyes on the Normandy coast. The request itself is an admission of blindness, a confession from high command that they no longer trust their own intelligence. They need a first-hand account. And Priller, disgusted with the indecision, decides he'll go himself. He tells his wingman, Sergeant Heinz Wuderzik, to get ready. Just the two of them. This moment feels like a breakthrough. Finally, a chance to cut through the fog of rumor and telephone reports. An ace pilot, a man whose word is unimpeachable, is going to fly over the beaches and deliver the ground truth. As they take off, the engines of their two fighters screaming into the morning sky, there's a sense of defiant optimism. They will be the ones to solve this mystery. They will fly low and fast, see the ships, count the landing craft, and return with the irrefutable evidence that will finally force the high command to act, to release the Panzers, and save the day. They climb to altitude and bank west, the green fields of France scrolling beneath them. The sky is eerily empty. No Allied fighters. No bombers. Just a strange, unsettling quiet. As they approach the coastline, they can see a pall of black smoke hanging over the horizon, a smudge against the gray sky that hints at the chaos below. Priller grips the stick, his eyes scanning, ready for anything. He is the hunter, seeking his prey, seeking the clue that will unlock the entire puzzle of D-Day. He is about to get his answer, but he has no idea that the sky is not empty by accident. It has been swept clean for a reason, and he is not the hunter. He is a lone observer flying straight into the heart of the largest and most dangerous machine ever assembled in the history of warfare. As Priller and Wuderzik break through the coastal haze, the illusion of a quick, clean reconnaissance mission evaporates. The scene below is not a battle, it is a biblical event. The 10,000 ships of Pluskat's frantic report are no longer an abstract number, but a terrifying, physical reality. From their vantage point at a few hundred feet, the two pilots are looking down at the logistical heart of the invasion, an intricate, terrifyingly organized ecosystem of war. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers form an outer ring, their main guns still belching cordite and smoke, methodically pounding the German positions inland. Closer to shore, an endless conveyor belt of landing craft, transports, and bizarre specialized vehicles, the ones called Hobart's funnies, are crawling toward the beaches like a tide of steel beetles. And the beaches themselves, they are chaos incarnate. They are red. Red with the blood of men. Red with the marker flags of engineers clearing mines. Red with the burning wreckage of tanks and trucks. They can see the tiny figures of men spilling from the ramps of Higgins' boats, disappearing into the surf, struggling against the murderous crossfire from the bluffs. They are witnessing Omaha Beach at its most brutal. This is not a feint. This is not a diversion. The sheer scale of it is an argument that crushes all other possibilities. Priller's brief, hopeful investigation is over. He has found the truth. But in that same instant, the enemy's genius is revealed. The reason the sky was so quiet, so empty, becomes chillingly clear. It was a trap. The entire Allied air armada, thousands of Spitfires, Mustangs, and Thunderbolts, wasn't over the beaches. They were flying a massive aerial screen, a high-altitude barrier miles out, daring the Luftwaffe to show up. They had created a sterile corridor, a perfectly prepared stage for the invasion to unfold upon, and Priller had just flown right under the curtain. Suddenly, the air around their two small fighters explodes. Not with German anti-aircraft fire from the ground, but with Allied naval anti-aircraft fire from the sea. Every ship in that colossal fleet that can point a gun at the sky opens up. It is a dome of flak, a blizzard of steel. Red, green, and white tracer rounds lash past their canopies, so thick they look like colored rain going up instead of down. The sky, which had been their element, their sanctuary, is now the most dangerous place on Earth. This wasn't just a defense, it was a statement of overwhelming, crushing superiority. The Allies weren't just invading, they were demonstrating that they owned the sky above the invasion. The promising lead, the simple reconnaissance flight, has become a dead end, a desperate flight for survival. Priller wrenches his stick, throwing the Messerschmitt into a gut-twisting dive, skimming the waves, the salt spray hitting his windscreen. He and Wuderzik are no longer pilots, they are prey. They race along the coastline, a pair of terrified gazelles that have stumbled into a pride of 1,000 lions. Their mission is no longer to report on the invasion, but to simply survive it. The clarity they sought has been found, but it is a useless, terrifying clarity. The enemy isn't just strong, they are smarter, bigger, and better prepared in every conceivable way. And the German response, so far, has been ground. The battle for truth is growing more desperate. The German command structure is a nervous system in shock, with contradictory signals firing in every direction. The generals closest to the front, men like General Erich Marx at the 84th Corps, are screaming up the chain of command that this is it, the Schwerpunkt, the main effort. They are deluged with reports from the remnants of their coastal divisions, fragmented accounts of whole battalions ceasing to exist, of command posts being overrun. Their reality is one of imminent collapse. But miles away, at Hitler's headquarters, the priests of the plan are still in control. The Calais deception is working its magic with hypnotic power. They interpret the Normandy landings as a massive, brilliantly executed sacrifice, a feint designed to draw the panzers west, just before the real hammer blow falls at the Pas-de-Calais. To them, releasing the armored reserve now would not be a decisive counterattack, it would be the stupidest mistake in military history. It would be falling for the oldest trick in the book. The system is gridlocked. Two irreconcilable realities are at war, and the fate of the German army and France hangs on which one wins. The breakthrough, when it comes, doesn't come from a general's brilliant deduction or a spy's coded message. It comes from a piece of technology and the quiet, methodical work of a handful of men in a signals intelligence bunker. The German Funkaufklärung, the radio intercept service, had been listening to the Allies for years. They were experts at decoding low-level tactical chatter. But the most important Allied communications, the high-level strategic stuff, was protected by encryption machines of incredible complexity. It was like listening to a conversation in a locked room, through a concrete wall. You could hear murmurs, but you couldn't make out the words. But you don't always need to understand the words to understand the meaning. Throughout the morning of June 6th, the German analysts at Station J, the main intercept post in Paris, noticed something. A pattern. On the vast, crackling spectrum of Allied radio frequencies, a new and unusual signal had appeared. It was a single, coded phrase, broadcast over and over again on specific naval channels. And then, they find it. A clue so potent it has become a legend of D-Day, a Rosetta Stone that, for the analysts in that bunker, promised to unlock the entire mystery. On its own, the phrase was meaningless gibberish. Another piece of Allied eccentricity. But a junior officer, a man whose name is lost to history, cross-referenced it. He dug through stacks of old intelligence summaries, forgotten reports from months earlier. And there he found it. A fragment, a single intercepted communication from a French resistance cell, captured and decoded weeks ago. The report mentioned that the Allied High Command had designated a series of trigger words to be broadcast to the invasion fleet. These words were confirmations, final go signals for different phases of the operation. And buried in that old, dusty file was a small, almost insignificant detail, the code phrase confirming that the landings at Normandy were, in fact, the main invasion and not a feint, was Mickey Mouse. Suddenly, everything clicks into place for the men in the bunker. This isn't just a clue, it's a confession, broadcast unwittingly by the enemy themselves. The analysts scramble to verify, checking the frequencies, the transmission times, the source. It all lines up. The signal is coming from the Allied Naval Command ships off the Normandy coast. It's authentic. Hope surges through the bunker. This is it. This is the irrefutable proof, the silver bullet that can kill the ghost of Calais and finally convince the High Command to unleash the panzers before it's too late. A new, more dangerous path is now clear. They must get this intelligence into the right hands, immediately. The Mickey Mouse intercept is a bombshell. It's the kind of pure, unassailable intelligence that strategists dream of. It bypasses the fog of war, cutting straight to the enemy's heart, revealing his innermost thoughts. The report is immediately flagged with the highest possible urgency Blitzfernschreiben, lightning telegram, and sent rocketing up the chain of command. It flies past the divisional headquarters, past the army group, and lands squarely on the desk of the one man who could use it to shake the foundations of the German High Command, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the Commander-in-Chief West. Von Rundstedt is an old man, a relic of the Prussian aristocracy, a professional soldier from an era before fanaticism. He views Hitler and the Nazis with a thinly veiled contempt, seeing them as vulgar, hysterical amateurs. But he is also a pragmatist, a man bound by his soldier's oath. He has been arguing for hours, with a mounting sense of weary futility, that the Panzers needed to be moved. The Mickey Mouse intercept is the weapon he has been waiting for. It is objective, technical proof that validates his own military intuition. Armed with this new intelligence, he does what a commander is supposed to do. He makes a decision. He immediately contacts Field Marshal Rommel, and the two are in rare, complete agreement. This is the moment. The window of opportunity, almost slammed shut, has been wedged open again by this single piece of information. Together, they draft the order. They formally request the immediate release of the OKW Panzer Reserves, the 1st SS Panzer Corps, containing the elite 12th SS Hitlerjugend and the Panzerlehr divisions for a massive, concerted counterattack against the Normandy beachhead. This is it. The steel jaw of the trap is finally being told to snap shut. But in doing so, they have just uncovered an uncomfortable and ultimately fatal truth about their own command structure. The truth is this: their authority was an illusion. The power they thought they had as field marshals of the German Reich was a sham. The plan, the obsession with Calais, wasn't just a strategic assessment anymore. It had become a political loyalty test. To question the Calais theory was to question the Führer's own strategic genius, because Hitler himself was one of the deception's most ardent believers. The Mickey Mouse intercept, which should have been seen as a brilliant intelligence coup, was now something far more dangerous. It was an inconvenient fact. It was a direct challenge not to an enemy plan, but to their own leader's deeply held conviction. And in the twisted logic of the Third Reich, a fact that contradicted the Führer was not a fact at all. It was an act of insubordination, or worse, defeatism. The two field marshals have just unknowingly escalated their fight from a battle against the Allies to a battle against the very center of their own government. The request from von Rundstedt and Rommel arrives at OKW, the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, the supreme command of the armed forces, and lands on the desk of General Alfred Jodl. Jodl is Hitler's chief of operations, a man whose entire career and survival depend on one skill: interpreting and anticipating the Führer's will. He is not a battlefield commander, he is a courtier in a uniform, a gatekeeper to the throne. Imagine Jodl in his office at Berchtesgaden. The air is thin, pristine, far removed from the stench of cordite and salt water in Normandy. On his desk are two competing realities. On one hand, he has the desperate, frantic pleas from the most experienced field marshals in the West, now armed with a seemingly definitive piece of signals intelligence. On the other hand, he has the Führer's own grand strategic vision, a vision that has, for months, revolved around the inevitable, decisive battle at Calais. The Mickey Mouse intercept doesn't clarify the situation for Jodl, it makes it infinitely more dangerous for him, personally. To accept the intercept as truth is to implicitly tell Hitler that he has been completely fooled, that his intuition has failed him, and that the entire defensive strategy for France is wrong. To wake the Führer with such news is not just to deliver a bleak military assessment, it's to risk a terrifying, volcanic eruption of rage. Hitler was notorious for shooting the messenger, for seeing bad news as a sign of disloyalty or incompetence in the one delivering it. So the system pushes back. Jodl and his superior Field Marshal Keitel do what bureaucrats have done since the dawn of time: they prevaricate. They stall. They question the source. Is this signals intelligence reliable? Could it not be a plant, a double bluff by the enemy to make us commit our reserves prematurely? The Führer has not yet been woken. We cannot make a decision of this magnitude without his express permission. Their official response back down the chain of command is a masterpiece of passive aggression and bureaucratic inertia. They don't deny the request outright. Instead, they dismiss it. The order from on high is to wait, to gather more information, to continue to treat the Normandy landings as a large-scale diversion until the situation becomes clearer. It's a death sentence delivered in the bland language of a memorandum. They are not just ignoring the intelligence, they are burying it under the immense weight of protocol and fear. The generals in the field are told, in no uncertain terms, to stand down. The panzers will not be released. The direct order is given: do nothing until the Führer awakens and makes his own assessment. This is the absolute bottom, the lowest point. For the men on the ground, the punishment for seeing the truth is not a transfer or a demotion, it is something far more cruel. It is the agony of being right and being forced to watch, in excruciating slow motion, as the price for their superiors' ignorance is paid in the lives of their men. For Field Marshal von Rundstedt, the news that the panzers are to remain leashed is met with a profound, almost serene cynicism. He is an old soldier who has seen the madness of the regime up close before. This isn't a surprise, it's a confirmation of his darkest fears about the conduct of the war. Imagine a master surgeon, standing outside an operating room, being told by a hospital administrator that he is not allowed to enter until the patient has nearly bled to death, just to be absolutely sure the wound is serious. That was the feeling in his headquarters. There is a famous, perhaps apocryphal, story from later that day, when an officer from Keitel's staff called and asked frantically, "What shall we do?" Von Rundstedt's reply was the weary, bitter epitome of this moment: "Make peace, you fools. What else can you do?" Hundreds of miles away, the most tragic figure in this drama is trapped in a staff car, racing down a German Autobahn. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the one man who had fanatically, obsessively preached that the first 24 hours would be decisive, had been on leave for his wife's birthday. Now he is a prisoner in his own frantic journey back to the front, listening to the reports over the radio, the car's powerful engine a useless counterpoint to the slow, agonizing death of his entire defensive strategy. He could feel the phantom vibration of his Panzer's engines in his bones, a power he was forbidden to unleash, making the smooth hum of his staff car an instrument of torture. Every minute that ticks by on the dashboard clock is a fresh stab of failure. He can picture it all in his mind's eye: the vulnerable landing craft, the disorganized troops on the sand, the perfect, fleeting opportunity for his panzers to charge into the chaos and create a bloodbath. It was the battle he had spent a year preparing for, and he was missing it. Disarmed by the one enemy, he could never defeat the deluded certainty of his own Führer. And in Berchtesgaden, around mid-morning, Adolf Hitler finally awakens. When he is given the news of the Normandy landings, his reaction is not one of alarm or concern. It is euphoria. The news couldn't be better. He reportedly exclaims to his stunned aides. In his mind, the enemy has at last blundered. They have fallen for the feint, landed in the wrong place, and delivered themselves into his hands where he can annihilate them. The supreme commander of the German war machine is celebrating a fantasy while his armies in the field are being systematically dismantled by reality. The clock has won. The critical hours from dawn until noon, the hours when the beachheads were a fragile, chaotic mess, have been squandered. The Allied soldiers are no longer just fighting for a foothold on the sand, they are establishing a lodgment. They are pushing inland, capturing roads, linking up. The fire that could have been stamped out with a single, decisive boot heel has now become a raging inferno. The disaster that Pluskat saw from his bunker, that Priller witnessed from the sky, and that von Rundstedt tried to prevent with a telephone call, is now irrevocably in motion. The order to release the panzers would finally come, late that afternoon, but by then, it would be an order to attack a fortress, not a beach. The price of truth, paid in hours that morning, was the loss of the war in the West. The catastrophe, when it unfolds, is exactly as Rommel had feared, but worse. The order to move the panzers finally goes out in the late afternoon. The coiled spring is released. But instead of leaping into a vulnerable, disorganized enemy on an open beach, the 21st Panzer Division and elements of the 12th SS Hitlerjugend are now grinding forward into a landscape that has been utterly transformed. They are attacking into the teeth of an enemy who has had nearly 12 hours to dig in, to set up anti-tank guns, and, most critically, to establish absolute dominion of the air. This is the consequence. This is the bill coming due for the morning's indecision. Imagine you are a young panzer commander, peering through the narrow vision slit of your tank. Your orders are to drive to the sea, to smash the British and Canadian forces north of Cannes. But the drive is a nightmare. The sky is not empty. It is filled with Hornets. Allied J-bows fighter bombers, P-47 Thunderbolts and Hawker Typhoons are circling overhead like vultures. They are the masters of this domain, and they have been waiting for you. The moment your column of tanks breaks cover onto a French country road, the radio crackles with a spotter plane's report. Then you hear it, a high-pitched whistle that builds into a terrifying scream. You duck, an instinctive, useless gesture, as a rocket slams into the tank in front of you. A flash of light, a geyser of black smoke and orange flame, and a 70-ton Panther tank is turned into a funeral pyre. This isn't a battle, it's a turkey shoot. The advance stalls. The tanks are forced to disperse, to hide in copses of trees, under bridges, in barns. The mighty Panzer divisions, the invincible iron fist of the Reich, are reduced to scurrying for cover like frightened animals. By the time the few tanks that survive the aerial onslaught get close to the front lines, they are met by a wall of steel. British 17-pounder anti-tank guns, firing from concealed positions. Naval gunfire, directed by forward observers who can see your every move, walking massive shells up and down your line of advance. The brilliant, decisive counterattack that was envisioned as a glorious cavalry charge becomes a series of disjointed, piecemeal jabs that are bloodily repulsed. The one major German counterattack on D-Day, a single thrust by the 21st Panzer, reaches the coast between Sword and Juno beaches for a brief, glorious moment, before being hammered from the flanks and forced to withdraw after dark, having achieved nothing but crippling losses. From the perspective of men like Werner Pluskat, watching from his battered bunker as the last of his guns are silenced, the failure is absolute. He had seen the Armada at dawn. He had given the warning. He had done his duty. And he has now witnessed the result of that warning being ignored. He sees the tide of men and machines coming ashore not slow, not stop, but grow. The trickle has become a flood. The flood is becoming a tsunami that is washing away the very foundations of the German position in France. The tragic, avoidable losses of men and material on June 6th were not just a tactical defeat, they were the consequence of a system that had become more afraid of an inconvenient truth than it was of the enemy. Years later, long after the guns fell silent and Europe began to heal its scars, the archives were opened. In the quiet, dust-filled rooms where the secret histories of the war were kept, a historian could finally pull a file. A thin, brittle file, stamped with the fading ink of the German Signal Service. And inside, on a single, yellowed telex flimsy, he could find the words MICKY-MOUSE. And with that, the fog of war that had so thoroughly choked the German high command on June 6, 1944, finally, definitively, lifts. The catastrophe on the ground was now clear. The landings were a success. The beachheads were consolidated. The race to build up forces had begun, a race Germany was destined to lose. But the why of it all, the reason for the paralysis, was no longer a mystery to be debated by generals writing their memoirs. It was right there, in the declassified reports, the phone logs, the after-action interviews. We can now see the vindication of the men who saw the truth. Werner Pluskat, the artillery major who stared into the abyss and was told he was seeing things. Joseph Priller, the ace pilot who flew through a storm of steel to confirm the impossible and returned with a report no one was prepared to act on. And the unknown analyst who found the key in a forgotten file, only to have his discovery buried by men too terrified to speak truth to power. They were all vindicated. Their desperate warnings, once dismissed as hysteria or insubordination, were now officially recorded as the ignored, inconvenient, and catastrophic truth. The declassified file doesn't just tell us what happened, it proves that the German command had everything it needed to know in its hands by mid-morning on the most important day of the war. And it chose, deliberately, to be blind. So now, with all the pieces on the table, we can finally see the full picture. And it is a breathtaking, terrifying thing to behold. For years, we've been told the story of D-Day as a battle of numbers, of overwhelming Allied force. But that's not the whole truth. The real story, the one buried in the archives, is not about a military failure, but an intellectual one. It was a collapse of the mind before it was a collapse of the front line. Here is the final War College briefing. Think of the entire German command structure as an incredibly sophisticated fire alarm system. They spent years studying the building, analyzing the weak points, and concluded, with absolute certainty, that if a fire were to break out, it would happen in one specific room, the Pas-de-Calais. They wired every sensor, aimed every fire extinguisher, and briefed every fireman that this was the only room that mattered. They became obsessed with it. On the morning of June 6th, a smoke detector goes off in a completely different part of the building, a place called Normandy. That's Major Pluskat's phone call. The system's response? It must be a faulty sensor. Ignore it. A few minutes later, the sprinkler systems activate in Normandy as the naval bombardment begins. The system says, "It's just a drill, a test to make us look away from the real fire room." Then, a security guard, Joseph Priller, actually runs out of the Normandy wing, his clothes smoking, shouting that the entire floor is an inferno. The system's response? He's panicking. Send him for a coffee. Finally, the Central Fire Department's own radio dispatcher, the Mickey Mouse Intercept, broadcasts a clear message: the main fire is confirmed in Normandy. And what does the fire chief do? He looks at the pristine, smoke-free room at Calais, the room the owner of the building, Adolf Hitler, was personally obsessed with, and he makes a decision. He decides it is less dangerous to let Normandy burn to the ground than it is to tell the owner that his theory about where the fire would start was wrong. That is what happened. Every bizarre clue, every contradiction, every moment of paralysis makes perfect, tragic sense when you see it through that lens. The German war machine on D-Day was not defeated by a lack of courage, or a lack of tanks, or even a lack of intelligence. It was defeated because the men at the top had built a religion around a single, flawed idea, and they were more committed to defending their faith than to defending their country. They were trapped inside the elegant prison of their own deception. The echoes of that morning are a chilling lesson in the nature of war itself. They remind us that the fog of war is often not a natural phenomenon. Sometimes, it is man-made, a deliberate smokescreen created by fear, by arrogance, and by a system that values loyalty more than reality. The longest day in June was decided not just on the bloody beaches, but in the silent, distant offices where a handful of men, holding the truth in their hands, found they did not have the courage to speak it. And so, the ultimate story of that German bunker is this: the most formidable fortress is not made of concrete and steel, but of conviction. The Western Front was broken not because the Atlantic Wall was weak, but because the men who commanded it were already trapped inside a much smaller bunker, the windowless room of a single, cherished lie.